This is an AZCourtHelp Legal Talk on how to do legislative research on the Navajo Code, filmed in 2021. Thank you.
So yat e bene she Candace French and she with the London initially which a tauba shi hanagaki da shi do comanche da shinale anadarko Oklahoma de ian sinasha kade hosno de kehasht en agat it ahin shle sex tyranny de nashnesh. So today I'm going to be reviewing how to do legislative research. And so the goals of this presentation, there's a few. First, I'm really geared this presentation for people who are brand new to the Navajo Nation. So if you don't understand the government structure, or you're not sure what the legislative branch does, how they're referred to, those kinds of things. There's some really basic information in here that I wanted to just kind of put as a foundation. I'm also going to review the authorities of the council and its committees. I'm going to recognize the authorities of the Office of Legislative Counsel, provide an overview of the legislative process, and then the meat is how to conduct legislative research and to identify other legislative issues. And that's what we'll be doing. Before we start, my first job out of law school, I worked for the Office of Legislative Counsel. And so with that, I would I would draft the legislation for the council delegates. And so that could be anything from approving a land use plan to writing a legislation for appropriations from any kind of funding source, UUFB or the CIHSN, assisted with the annual budget. So I just did a whole lot of different types of legislation having to do with natural resource or with NTUA or NDOT, writing the official positions of the Navajo Nation on certain state or federal legislation going through. And so I just did a lot. And when you do legislative research, it can be a little overwhelming, especially if you don't know how to do it or you don't know what the body does or how it functions. So just to give you an overview of what the Navajo Nation Council is, it's the legislative body of the Navajo Nation. Formerly, it was referred to as the Navajo Tribal Council. So if you do research, from back in the 50s, 60s, you're going to see, you'll see NTC or Tribal Council resolution. And so it's the same thing. It's just now known as the Navajo Nation Council. The powers, the composition, and all the other things that you need to know about the Navajo Nation Council can be found in Title II of the Navajo Nation Code, beginning at Section 101. At Sequentia, it goes on and on for about to about section 700 or 800. And so you'll see all of that. The committee authorities of council can also be found starting at section 300 at Sequentia. By statute, standing committees have final authority over certain matters. For example, maybe some certain appointments of standing committee might have the final authority, and it doesn't need to go all the way to NABI or to council, or NABI might have final authority on a certain matter and it doesn't need to go up to council. And then some things absolutely have to go to council. So those you'll need to understand those, and you can find all that as I explain later in the next slide. Currently, there are 24 delegates that represent 110 Navajo chapters. Right now, we are currently under the 24th Navajo Nation Council. So the different committees of the Navajo Nation Council are the Budget and Finance Committee. You can find their authorities under Section 300. Health, Education, and Human Services, you can find theirs at 400. RDC, which is Resources and Development, you can find that at 500. Law and Order, you find that at 600. And then NABI, you can find that at 700. And so, a lot of times the Budget, Finance, has Resources and Development, and Law and Order. Those are easy. You can kind of figure out what their authorities are. Where it gets a little bit more tricky is when you look at what NABI can do versus what council can do, because if you just look at it, NABI is composed of all 24 delegates, and so is the council. There are slight differences, one being a quorum. the quorum requirements for NABI and council are different, and the authorities of NABI and council are different. So, sometimes if you're trying to figure out who, which committees have to go through, you'll want to understand the authorities. That way you're better able to navigate the legislation. Just for your information, some of the important government resolutions that shaped the current Navajo Nation government, and these are more recent ones. I didn't go and give you like the really, really old ones, like the formation, initial formation. So these are the most recent ones. The current Navajo Nation as we know it with three-branch government. I start with CD 6889. That was like the big one where we reformed the government and became the three branches and separated legislative from executive. So that's a very important one that if you're doing research about the government or how executive came to have its powers or how legislative came to have its powers, CD 6889 is a good place to start. Cap 1011, that's an important legislation. It reflects the change from the 88 delegates to now the 24. It also reflects the reduction of the standing committees because there used to be, I believe, 12. Now there's those 5 that we just went over. And it modified the legislative process, and it included the public comment period as well as how we address emergency legislation. CO 4512 is another one. This one was approved through CJA 0313. The council had to override a veto of the president. So you'll see these 2 numbers kind of in conjunction. CJA 0313 with CO 4512. This again also reflects the 24-member council, and it revised some other things like the quorum and the different committee directives. The Navajo Council has its own legal representation, and that's through the Office of Legislative Counsel. They represent the legislative branch whenever they have an issue. But the major duty that the Legislative Council has is in drafting the legislation for the Navajo Nation Council. So at Section 961, you'll see the purpose of the Legislative Council is to provide legal advice and legal representation and legislative services to the council, its committees, the commission boards, and the rest of the Navajo Nation legislative branch, which is independent of the Department of Justice. However, if the nation is being sued and the Department of Justice gets involved, they work in conjunction. The authorities of Legislative Council, you can find these at 964A5. It's kind of a repetition of what I just went over, but that's the actual authority of the Legislative Council. The legislative process, so there are several major steps in drafting or in a bill becoming law. I'm going over this so that you can understand if you have to track a legislation or you have to find a legislation, or if you get an assignment saying, hey, there's a legislation going through, can you follow it? This is here to help you understand how to do that. So in addition to kind of being retrospective and looking up laws, this is also being prospective and looking at following of legislation as it makes its way through. So the major steps of creating law is that you have the initiation stage. If somebody needs something done, let's say like the Navajo Nation program needs their plan of operation revised and amended, they'll find a sponsor and they'll say, hey, delegate so-and-so, I need you to sponsor this. We need to change it for X, Y, and Z. They'll come in and they'll get all the information to that delegate. They'll come in and that delegate will submit a request to the Office of Legislative Counsel. Legislative Counsel will, hand that out administratively how they operate, and it will get drafted by an attorney within that office, and then it will be released back to the delegate, and they'll sign for it and accept it or send it back, whatever. But then it goes on to the Office of Legislative Services, and they'll conduct their intake and their review to make sure that everything's there that they need in order for it to be posted. They'll send it to the Speaker's office for review, which will stamp all of the committees that it has to go through. Sometimes you'll see that the stamp will differ from the title The title reflects what the drafting attorney believes needs the committees it needs to go through, but the final authority does rest with the Speaker of the Council. Then it will be posted and then it will be put out for 5-day public comment on DIBS. And I'll explain what DIBS is later. There'll be digital distribution of the legislation. There'll be public comment, and I'll show you how to submit those. Then it starts to go out to the different committees that will work its way through according to how the Speaker has stamped it. And then if it needs to go to council, it will be referred up to council. So that's the legislative process in a nutshell. It's a lot more complicated, and it's a process than what I have, but these are the major steps. And this is from the legislative branch's website as well. So they give you some information as well, and I'll go over that. When you're looking at resolutions, it's important to understand the numbers that are reflected on that legislation. For example, you'll see CD 6889. And to a person that doesn't understand that, that just looks like a random set of letters and numbers, but it actually has a purpose for the Navajo Nation. So by looking at this, the first letter, the C, it will denote which body passed that resolution. So C denotes council, LOC will be law and order, RDC will be resources and development, BF will be budget and finance, HEHSC will be HES, and then NABI will be NABI. So you'll see that at the beginning. The second letter, D, denotes the month that that resolution was passed. So January's JA, February's F, March is MA, not to be confused with May, April is AP, May is MY, June is JN, July is JY, August is AU, September is S, October is O, November is N, and December is D. So the only, I mean, it's pretty self-explanatory, except when you get to like March and May and January and July, you're kind of like, oh my God, what is this? Which month is it? But that's how you can tell which month it was passed. The first number is the sequential number resolution of that year. So it might be a number 1 for council. That would be the first resolution that was passed in that preceding year, which is the last number 89. So this right here tells me that this was a council resolution that was passed in December. It was the 68th resolution passed in the year of 1989. So that's how you're going to be reading these resolution numbers. And those become important, especially if you have a timeline that you have to follow, like if you have to find all the CHSN legislation that were passed in 2018, at least you'll be able to figure it that way, okay? Now we're getting kind of into like the actual nuts and bolts of how to conduct legislative research. All that, whatever I went over before, was kind of like the foundational. This is kind of orientation of where we're at in the legislative process. This is actually now looking retrospectively at, now you have to find all your resources and put it all together and find resolutions. So the hard copies of the Navajo Nation Code, if you're familiar with the hardbound copies, it's the navy blue books that have the gold foiling. Those by themselves, without pocket parts, are current to June 2005. And the beginning pages of those books will explain that as well. The supplement and pocket parts have been added since then. The most recent pocket part that's available is covers partially from 2014 to partially 2017. If you don't have that pocket part is going to be available at the Office of Legislative Counsel. So you're probably wondering, well, okay, so how do I research everything after 2017 if that's how far the pocket part goes? You will have to use DIBS, which is a system that the legislative branch uses to allow for public comment, allow for viewing of the legislation that are working through, and to archive the legislations that have been whatever council action has been taken, whether it's expired, it's tabled, it's vetoed, it's whatever, it's all going to be on there. So everything after 2007 that the pocket part doesn't cover will be available on there. However, DIBS is only going to provide the council and committee resolutions from 2015 and after. So if there's something, if you need to find a resolution from 2013, it's not going to be on DIBS. And you're going to have to do a little bit more work to find that resolution. And again, later on, I'll get to it when I'm showing you how to navigate the database and the legislative branches website. The code is available in different places. For those of you that don't have Westlaw, there is a code that's available on the Office of Legislative Services website, nnols.org, and that is current to 2009. Okay, so you'll want to be sure that when you're looking at that, you know that whatever law is in there is the law as of December 2009, and it might not be reflective of what's been passed since. So you'll need to do extra research. The code available on Westlaw, if you do have Westlaw, that is current through February 11th, 2014. So you'll want to be sure that you're noting that when you look at Westlaw. And if you have the pocket part, you know, it's going to cover 14 to 17. The legislative branch does have a research unit that also archives. Legislative service shall respond to public records requests within a specified time frame of 90 days. So you can go to the legislative branch and submit a request, you know, for that 2013 resolution that you're looking for. You can submit a request. You're going to have some information about what you're looking for, but they will be able to assist you in finding that. To NNC H88H, they can bill you a reasonable cost for any of the photocopying or duplicating, but if they send it in digital form, it's probably not going to cost anything. But if you're old school and want hard copies, you know, you're probably going to have to pay something, but I don't have those costs. Usually I just get everything digitally. So for resolutions before 2014 that aren't available on DIBS, some useful information, and you're going to need this for the form that you fill out for legislative services. Try to have or find the resolution number that you're looking for. I know that's easier said than done, but it is possible if you just kind of get yourself comfortable and savvy with how to work the database. You know, sometimes you might actually just have it and then you just need to fill it out, and then she's able to find it. And I say she because the person working with it is a female. Having the resolution number will help them out tremendously. Otherwise, they're going to have to do a search, a query of what it is you're looking for. Like if you go and say, I need a legislation that amended Title 17. You know, that's not a lot of information. I mean, they can narrow it down, but if you're looking for something specific, they're going to have to, you know, do a search of Title 17 amendments and look through that. So the more information you have that will help the researchers find it, the quicker you're going to get a response, and you'll make their life a lot easier. So that's my tip for if you absolutely don't have a resolution number. You should try to find it and provide that, or at least provide as much information as you can to help the ladies back there find it for you. Sometimes you can find an old resolution by looking at DIBS because it might be an exhibit to a legislation. So for example, if a department is revising their plan of operation, and it was previously, the current version on the books is from 2012, and it's 2021 and they're trying to revise it. A lot of times the old exhibit or the old plan of operation is attached to the back of that legislation as an exhibit to show this is what it looked like, this is what it's going to look like. So you can find it that way. especially like if you know that you're looking for a plan of operation from, let's say, fleet management. You'll type in fleet management, you'll see that there's a resolution, you'll open that resolution, and you'll see that their old plan of operations attached. That's an easy way to find an old legislation if it's pretty easy to do a search, and if you know exactly what it is that you're looking for. If all else fails, you can try to go to the Navajo Nation Records Management. I think they actually do charge you to do some of the research and copying. The caveat is that they have the same information as legislative services. I believe they work off of a disk that has the same information. So you can try it. Maybe it was just human error that, the ladies at OLS couldn't find it, and now you want to try your luck with records management. But it's not like they're going to have a separate data set. They're going to have the exact same information, and it's going to cost you. But records management should have all of the legislation as well. And I've had to go to records management for some stuff, but didn't turn out for much anything than what OLS had. So that's my suggestion for you. Like I said, you're able to look at the exhibits of a current resolution, and you'll be able to find an old one. This is an example. Approving the alternative forum for enforcement of binding arbitration. So you can find these old resolutions, CD 6013, that was an exhibit A to a previous resolution or legislation that was on before council, I think probably like in 2017 or 18. So that's an easy way to find that information. When you're working with the Navajo Nation Code, it might be a little bit overwhelming, because if you have those blue books, it's like 8 inches of books, and so it's a little inundating. But at least if you know the structure of the code, you'll be able to pinpoint where something might be. For example, if you're doing legal research on, you need to find all of the election issues, whatever. I'm making something up. You'll know to go to Title 11. And you might want to look at Title 26 just to, be belts and suspenders. You might want to look at Title 2 as well. So at least you kind of have an overview of the places you should look. Doubtful you'll find something about elections in Title 3 or Title 4 or 18. So at least this helps you narrow your search down to some specific titles of the Navajo Nation Code. The appendix to the code is actually really helpful. If you haven't looked at that, you should go look at it, because sometimes your research will involve federal legislation or the treaty or, an executive order that created the reservation, whatever it could be, where there was kind of like federal or state action. The appendix, intergovernmental relations, will probably have that. It's a good little resource. You can go back there and look for it instead of looking on the internet and Googling and wondering if what source you have is an accurate one. At least this one's in the Navajo Nation Code as an appendix. So that's a good little resource and a good little tip in case you're doing research outside of the nation, but involves, the creation, the government, the intergovernmental relationship. So that's a good little area to look at too for other things. So this is the Navajo Nation Legislative Branch's Legislative Services website. The council has its own website that offers different information, but this is actually where you're going to find the resolutions as they are archived and as they're going through committee. So this is at nnols.org. That's the website, and it's going to bring you up to this page. On top, this little ribbon right here, you have the home legislative tracking, and that's useful because it will give you almost like a manual of how to do a lot of legislative research and how to track things, and that's the actual manual produced by the legislative services, so that's helpful. It will also teach you how to use DIBs. if you forget everything that I told you today, that's a resource as well. It gives you the overview of the legislative process and the different manuals and the different flow charts, and maybe some of it will directly provide some of the resolutions that have to do with the legislative process. You can find that all right there. The Navajo Nation Council, you can find like committee agenda, you can find a roster. Committees, you'll also find the roster and the agenda for whatever meeting that they're having. Right here, when I said the code available, this is where you'll be looking for the Navajo Nation Code. And remember, it's time limited. I believe I said it was 2009. So that's it. If you don't have the code, if you don't have the code books, if you don't have Westlaw, this is a resource that you can use, but just know that it is missing years. Reference tab is actually pretty useful because it has committee rules in it. Committee rules and then the council rules in it. So that's helpful if you want to follow and make sure council's following the rules that they said that they would. About us has a little bit of information about the legislative branch, and then the contact. If you have to find somebody in the legislative branch, this provides the directory and you can find that person that can help you. This is also where you can go to find the links if you want to watch a live council session. I don't believe RDC or any of the committees have like live stream where you can see them on camera. Those might have to go up here and find the call-in number, but that's how you can listen to those. So I keep saying dibs. What does that mean? It's Dene Bibahazani Binatsos. So if you can't say that, just say dibs. I think people will know what you're talking about. But if you scroll down from that nnols.org page, you will find the link to dibs. Otherwise, what I would do, because sometimes the website might be down, bookmark dibs once you get there. That way you'll always have direct access and you don't have to come through the OLS page. So dibs, this is where you're going to find it. This is also where you're going to find the request for public records form. If you just call up legislative research, they're going to say fill out a form, or they'll email it to you, but you'll make their life easier if you just download it, fill out what you want and send it to them. They know what to do with that. So that's where you'll find those. Emailing public comments, it gives you instructions for how to do that as well. And then there's just information at the bottom. Once you click on dibs, it's going to bring you up to a page that looks like this. And I just screenshotted this a few days ago, so it's pretty accurate. I mean, I'm sure legislation has been added since, but this is what it looks like. The format hasn't changed. If you're looking for resolutions that were passed in the 23rd Council, you need to pay attention to this part right here where it's right underneath dibs. It says previous council. That's going to take you back to the database for the 23rd Council. So if something was passed before 2019, that's going to be right there. So, you know, if they say go find all the legislation that Ben Bennett presented in the 23rd, you'll want to go there and then run a report. But if you don't need it that far, if you want to see more current things, you'll go and it's right here. It auto directs you to the current council. So right here, you can generate legislative reports. So if you have a project where you have to track all of the CIHSN funded projects, you know, that this is an easy way that you can do that. You can generate those reports. Or if you need to find all of the legislation that Thomas Walker presented in the 24th, you know, these are the ways that you can generate those without going through each one and making your own report. It does it for you. So if you can look for legislation on the year. So if you know that a legislation was passed in 2019, instead of like scrolling, you can just look in there by pulling down that tab and clicking 2019 and 2020, whatever it is. Same for if you're looking for the previous council stuff, it's the same. For the committees, if you want to just isolate budget and finance committee resolutions or NABI resolutions, or you just want council resolutions, that's how you can also run a search. If you want to just find the sponsor, you can do it that way as well. And this is the view when you pull down the advanced search. If you don't, it's just going to be a few, pull down tabs, but this is the advanced search view. You can look at the different legislation type, the different council actions. So if you want to see all the tabled legislation, you can go click on that. If you want to see all those that are closed, you can pull down on that. It's just whatever you need. So you might want to just go look in there, play around with it, and figure out how you can manipulate and produce a report. OLC number, that's if you know the legislative council's number that it assigns to legislation. That's different from a resolution number. The OLC number is legislative council's own internal administrative numbering system to keep track of what comes in, who it's assigned to, and when it's completed. So those don't necessarily mean anything, and I'm not even sure if it gets inserted enough for you to run a search through the OLC number. I think the only people that would use that might be Ledge Council, because they do also use DIBS as well. And then if you know the 164 or the SAS number, you might be able to find it that way. Again, I'm not sure how much information gets put into the database that you can search it that way, but it's there. So I'm assuming that you are able to run a search through the 164 number that's assigned when it goes through the executive review. You can also just do a general word search. So if you want to type in, let's think of something really unique. If you want to find anything having to do with the Cameron chapter, you might just find a word Cameron, and then you'll see everything where Cameron appears in the title. So if it appears in an exhibit or something like that, it's not going to show up. The search only searches the titles. So if you want to see all the land use plans that have been approved, or you're looking for a particular land use plan, you'll put like something like land use, and then it will bring up everything with land use in the title. Or if you want to do Sihasin, type in Sihasin, it's going to bring up anytime Sihasin appears in the title. So that's a good little search, especially if you have really unique terms that aren't going to appear in a lot of the titles. It's a good way to narrow your search down to what you're looking for. And then you'll see this, you'll see the legislation number, which is not the same as the resolution number. So I know there's a lot of numbers, which is why it's important to understand what number you're dealing with and working with. Legislation number is just the number that's assigned by the legislative services. The resolution number is the actual official number once that legislation has passed. Pretty explanatory. There's a title, you have the sponsor, any co-sponsors. The status tells you what's happened with it. So these, when I took the snapshot, we're on a 5-day hold, meaning that it was the public comment period, and then that they'd be ready at a date certain after that 5-day hold. You also see like in Resources and Development Committee, in this committee, tabled, closed, expired. You'll see the different status of the legislations as they are. And then a quick view, you can go click on that and it will bring you up to what it looks like. Once you find a resolution that you want to look at and you click on it, it will bring you to a page that looks like this. So this one, I clicked on RDC 2921. There's the legislation number. The OLC number is down here. And there's the title, there's a description. So it should tell you kind of a quick little synopsis of what this legislation is about if you can't already tell from the title. But it gives you the same information that you would do a search by. But if you want to actually look at the legislation, you can either click on the read text part, that's a little hyperlink, and it will bring up the PDF, or you can go down here under this little black bar, and you can click on that. Now you'll want to be careful because sometimes there's various attachments, and it might be how it was drafted by OLC and submitted to Legislative Services. It might be how it was amended. It might be how it looks in NABI. It might be the final resolution. So you'll want to make sure that if you're looking at the various attachments underneath this black bar, that it's the most current one. But the easiest thing if you're looking for a final text is just use the final read text view mode. So that's that page. So tips for when you're researching, you want to make sure that you know how current the code is that you're working with, and you'll absolutely want to make sure that there were no amendments. So example, Title II has had a few amendments. So if you're looking at something from 2009, there's several amendments that have happened to Title II. So you'll want to make sure that you know that you're covering all your bases and following that, because you don't want to just go off of what's in the code and then not do your due diligence and find if there's any amendments. Also make sure that you're looking at the pocket parts and that those are the most recent, but you'll still want to see if there's anything done from 2017 and beyond, because I think there might be few procedural changes that happened in Title II. It could have been like a committee changed its meeting date to some other day. I think that was one of the recent ones, but you'll still want to make sure that you're looking at the most recent. Use DIBS to check any recent 2017 and after code amendments. Annotations are provided in the code. So if you pull a code, the blue book, you'll see the legislative history, and it gives you some good information. It will also direct you to any of the Supreme Court decisions that interpreted that part of the code. So that's a good place to look as well. Legislative tracking, you're always available to, are able to use DIBS to see where a legislation is going, where it's been, what's happened to it. So be sure that you know how to track your legislation if you're working, you know, you're working in DOJ and you got to follow whether your department that you oversee, if their plan of operation is approved or where it's at in the system. That's a good way to look through your legislative tracking. And don't forget to review Navajo case law. My presentation didn't have any of that. That's a separate issue. This was just strictly legislative stuff. So you'll always want to make sure that you check any Navajo case law that may have interpreted that information or struck down law, whatever it is. And finally, when you open a legislation, make sure that you read any memos that are attached, because if you just look at it and it says resolution, you kind of tend to think, oh, okay, then that means it's the law now. Well, if it has to go through the president, it might have been vetoed, or parts of it might have been vetoed. So you'll want to look at the memo that it comes with and see what it says. There might also be the override. So just be aware that that happens sometimes. And just because there's a resolution doesn't necessarily mean that it's the law. You'll want to see and make sure that it has been signed by the president if it's a code amendment, or whatever committee, whether it's speaker, or any of the chairs of the committee. You'll want to make sure that it wasn't vetoed and it was actually signed and certified. So that's that information. Yeah, thank you.